Hey there everyone, welcome back to the Dan Cave and welcome to part 2 of the NuNu 24th scale Audi A4 BTCC 1996 Championship winner video build series. Whoa, deep breath after that mouthful. So this is part 2. Part 1 I think went quite well, covered the bodywork, covered the chassis and running gear. Part 2 is going to be a little bit shorter again because I'm just going to cover the interior. So there's no point in me hanging about for too long because that's just unnecessary padding on what's a relatively short video. So if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. Please like the video if you can and feel free to pop a comment as well. Without further ado, let's head on over to the bench and let's see how part 2 goes. So over we go. So as you can imagine, the obvious starting place is cleaning up all the interior parts. So clean off any sprue attachment points. I tend to like using the Tamiya sprue cutters just to get as close to the plastic as I can. The remainder of the sprue attachment can then be removed using a UMP thinny stick. That's also quite effective at removing any seam lines around any of the parts. So there is quite a reasonable part count for the interior. There's things like the pedals, the dash surround, the instrument panel, the steering wheel. And all these parts get pretty much the same treatment, which is remove any of the attachment points, clean up any of the seam lines using UMP sanders. And once, of course, I'm happy with all that, all these parts can be sent over to the spray booth for a bit of priming and then onto paint. And as you can see here, I'm spraying the extinguisher in Revell Aqua number 34 red. So that is unusual. It's one of the few parts in the interior that isn't primed in black. So the interior tub, there's plenty of carbon decals to go on the parts for that. These come from the NuNu detail upset. So there's one carbon piece for the bulkhead. Usual decal process using UMP decal solutions, and then the interior door cards are also in carbon fiber on that detail sheet. Some of the instrument boxes for the interior, they also have some carbon decals, and using the UMP strong and normal solutions, I think, so just normal and strong, just to get those decals to conform to the quite complex surface on some of these parts. So the seat itself has a Kevlar decal for the back. So that comes as one piece. So that requires quite a bit of softening and manipulation. There are a couple of strategic cuts in it to make it conform a little bit easier. But even though, there's still a bit of work to get it to settle down nicely and not have any significant creases. But once in place on the model, the use of decal solutions and some heat as well does actually do the decal very, very well. So once most of that decal work is done, there's a little bit of detail painting on some of the instruments just to add a little bit of colour, a little bit of variety, and something to break up that monotone silver and carbon fibre interior. Now the seat belts from NuNu, I think I've ended up using the actual supplied fabric. Just checking the lengths on it to make sure it fits inside the roll cage correctly. And then it's a case of working your way through the instructions, adding the buckles as shown. Try and keep the excess to a minimum. And then some very fine work with some tweezers. Some very delicate steps to get that ribbon to pass through the buckle end. So once I'm happy with that, I tend to use either double-sided tape to adhere them down or a little bit of super glue. Sometimes it's just quicker with some CA glue, but it can be messy. and it can soak through as well, through the ribbon material, so normally it's just a tiny amount required. So once I'm happy with that on the main shoulder harnesses, it's a case of making sure I have enough excess so that I can wrap around the roll cage in the correct location. So it feeds through this horizontal piece and basically wraps around. So that'll be glued in a little bit later. At the moment, I'm just checking for appropriate lengths, just to make sure if there's any trimming required of the seat belts. So decided to speed up the rest of the footage, as it's just a case of following through. Very delicate work with these buckles. It's all about trimming them in the right sequence, in the right order, and trying to make sure you get appropriate lengths. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you may have spotted a lighter appear at some point. So sometimes when you cut the ribbon, you can get some frayed ends. That can be difficult to pass through the buckles. I sometimes use a quick flash over a lighter just to get rid of any loose strands and basically melt the end of the ribbon. So it stops it fraying a little bit easier. You can also use CA glue to do that as well. You just need to be careful you don't actually make it any thicker by how much it soaks in. But ultimately, once I'm happy with all that, all the harnesses are complete on the seat. There is a couple of decals to go on. So there's the actual seat manufacturer's decal, the Recaro one, and then off the original decals provided by NuNu, just cut out the, I think it's Sparco logos for the shoulder harnesses. And they can be dropped in place. And then I like to use some UMP extra strong on top of that just to get them to conform nicely to the seatbelt material. So with all those steps done, it's time to start assembling the interior. So that rear bulkhead just pops in place with some CA glue. Obviously you need to make sure that decal is completely set because you don't want to risk lifting it or ripping it. And on some of the interior parts, as you can see, I've already added some vinyl tubing just to simulate the various electrical harnesses that are in and around the cabin. Fire extinguisher gets popped in. So the PE buckles or PE straps on this were very fiddly to do, but were done nonetheless. So once all the major bits are in, looking at reference photos, there's plenty of additional wiring in around the interior area. So this is where I'm starting to drill out some holes so I can pass through some cable just to add a little bit more detail on the interior. So I'm using a little bit of Tamiya cable in various thicknesses. Essentially, I'm just passing it through the hole I just drilled. Use that as an anchor point. So that can be glued down with some CA glue, and then routing it through into various locations similar to what I've seen in reference pictures. And as you can see, that lower part of the roll cage then sits on top of that wiring loom. So then there is further additional wiring in and around the gear control and back down towards the fire extinguisher. And then there was some blue coloured wire as well I could see in some reference pictures, mainly running between the gear shift and forward and aft, and kind of running in around the centre line. So again, I've tried to keep it approximately close to what I could see in the pictures, but mainly it's just about adding a little bit of additional detail. So with those details added, it's time to move on to assembling all the parts for the dash itself. So there's a shroud, instrument display, steering wheel, and then an additional control box which sits on the dash itself. and then that extended kind of dash shroud for the race car, because that essentially shifts the steering wheel back a bit, which means the driver's seat can be back a little bit more, which gets the balance of the car a little bit better for racing. So that can be done and put to one side. The seat itself can be added. And then once the seat is added, you can use some CA glue in the attachment points. And then the roll cage can be added in. So a little bit of careful alignment and manipulation just to make sure it sits in place in its locating pins properly. That of course will make sure it doesn't fail on anything like the roof line of the car when the body gets attached. And as you can see on the roll cage, a few additional parts have been added, like the rear view mirror and the driver's side mesh. So as I said earlier, the seatbelt harnesses actually wrap around the back of the roll cage. So they're just shown hanging over at the moment. A little bit of CA glue on the underside. And then it's about trying to find the right angle just to manipulate the end of the harness around to the other side so that can be glued down in place. And that done, the seat and harness are now correctly attached to the roll cage. Door cards can now be added. So they just slot nicely into place. There's a nice groove all the way around. The dash itself just slides onto the end of the roll cage. And then the other side of the interior door cards can be added as well. And that is basically the interior complete. To have the chassis and running gear from part 1, and now the interior from this part, and those two can be mated together. I have a little bit of play with the steering just to make sure there's nothing fouling, nothing is in the wrong place. So let's head back to me for some final thoughts about how part 2 has gone. And so there we have it. That is part 2 of this Audi A4 from NuNu on 24th scale completed. I'm really happy with the interior. Good use of the detail, upset carbon decals, obviously covering lots of areas. The panel at the rear, the door cards, the seat, etc. Oh, not the seat in this case. A few other bits around the dash as well. Thrown in some additions as well, some wiring as well that was kind of clearly visible from some of the research photos I had. So that's been kind of really added value as well. I think it makes the interior kind of just pop a little bit more. A little bit of photo etch as well is thrown in there as well for some of the bits in the interior. So pleased with its progress. Of course, seatbelts as well. Seatbelts went very well from NuNu this time. Absolutely spot on. The photo etch is perfect, and the ribbon they supplied was spot on in the detail set. So pleased with everything so far. So yeah, once again, there's not much really to dwell on or reflect on, and yeah, we'll just move on to part 3 where we'll do maybe a full summary of the build. So that's pretty much it from me for this video. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you've subscribed, hopefully you've liked the video, and feel free to leave a comment as well. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all very soon in part 3. So that's bye from me.